Hello, everybody. Uh, just waiting to make sure that I can hear myself on the stream. Looks like we're live. Great. Okay, I'm gonna move this off to the side and try to pay attention to your comments, if there are any. So tonight I'm streaming to basically talk to you about a catalyst proposal that I made for Fund 4, which is admittedly a kind of a rough conceptual version or imagination of what decentralized insurance powered by oracles might look like on the Cardano blockchain. So I just wanted to share a few updates on what I've been working on related to it, as well as address some valid criticism that I've received from the reviewers, and hopefully give a little bit of insight into where I'm coming from, and help understand where I'm at kind of mentally. Okay, so I have a little bit of visuals over here. Let's see if I can bring those up. So this is actually just a pretty picture I'm going to play in the background until for later. But let's get to the catalyst feedback first. Okay. Hey Patrick, welcome to the stream. So I don't know if you guys can see all this. Yeah, it should be. I'll try to zoom in. Where did the zoom go? There it is. So this was pretty cool. This was my first time receiving feedback in the what do you call it? Cardano feedback ecosystem for Catalyst, and I think there's some pretty good kind of questions and also criticisms that people had. I'm always more interested in the hard questions, so I'm going to mostly focus on the ones or the low scores that I received. Just go through them and try to kind of not rebut but address what I think are the perspectives that were pointed out. So this first one says that this proposal fails to benchmark any existing traditional finance, insurance projects, or even discuss the clear legacy touch points that would need to exist for this app to operate at any level of scale cross jurisdiction. This is not a scalable proposal that makes Cardano more competitive in the next 6 months. So I love this comment. I think it's super, it's well thought out. It addresses a gap in the presentation of the proposal. And I think it's a totally valid piece of criticism. So I want to really thank whoever wrote that, because it needs addressing. So just to be clear, there's an idea that I've called this an event risk contract system rather than insurance, because I'm fully aware that insurance is hello Marcia, is a very, how do you say, highly regulated industry with tons and tons of regulations, even within a single country. So if you're from the States, the United States, you probably know that even within the country, there are state level regulations which prevent, usually when you're dealing with an insurance company, you're dealing with a state level entity that, they have business in other states, but technically the entity that you're, dealing with is like Blue Cross Blue Shield Michigan or something like that. So I'm aware of that, and that's why for me this platform is not really trying to fulfill any legal requirements for insurance. So nothing like mandatory auto insurance for, if you have a car in the States, again, and I think in a lot of developed countries, you are required to hold insurance on it. Or another example, it's not legal, but required by mortgage companies, any kind of homeowners insurance required by your mortgage company. This probably would not compete in this space. But what niche then are we looking to address? We're looking to address areas where people are exposed to risk and they would like someone else to take that risk off of their hands, and they're willing and able to pay for that service, right? So it's really kind of like a betting line. It's like a local neighborhood dice game, except instead of shooting dice, you're asking for someone to compensate you if you get hit by an earthquake, at least initially, right? So that's kind of one of the exciting things is that if you look at, I've been reading a lot more about the insurance. I found this great thing from the OECD, and let's see if I think I just shut that tab. But in most developed countries, insurance is something like 9 to 11% of the total GDP, which is an insanely large thing. But at the same time, like no insurance company is larger than like 4% of the market, and that kind of fragmentation is due to all these kind of hyper local regulatory systems that this commenter is alluding to. Interestingly, also in the Fortune 100, 12 of the top companies in the Fortune 100, which are the largest companies, I believe, in the world, not just in the United States, are insurance companies. So it's a huge industry, but it has tons of money in it, but it doesn't really have a dominant player, which is quite an interesting kind of thing. And a lot of them are several hundred-year-old organizations, so that even makes it more kind of ripe for disruption. And I think the second comment is a really good thing too. An insurance DApp proposal this complex requires more technical documentation or a white paper describing the protocol in depth. This proposal is lacking in depth. So yep, I agree. This is a kind of a spit out idea, or what do you call it, like a brainstormed idea that I came up with specifically to respond to my feeling that Catalyst proposals aren't ambitious enough. So I kind of, not kind of, I'm extremely excited by Cardano, and I am extremely excited by what Cardano can do, but I wouldn't say equally underwhelmed, but pretty closely the inverse amount underwhelmed by the kind of proposals, or the scale of the proposals, I should say, that I see on Catalyst. And so I explicitly tried to come up with an idea that I think could kind of be part of a global financial operating system that I thought there would be a niche for in terms of what Cardano might be able to provide for it, and tried to kind of come up with an idea in that space. And I've asked for funds, 50,000 US dollars, to basically, I can go public with this now. I've been in talks with Tweeg, who are the, how do you say, actually the people who developed Plutus, or for IOHK at the time, IOG now, to develop. My understanding is they developed Plutus, off of Haskell, to under direction from IOG, and so I thought they're quite an expensive firm. I can't go into the details because that's proprietary information to them, but almost all, if not all, of the funds that I have requested would go to Tweeg, and I would not be compensating myself with this proposal, or the technical kind of co-founder that I have got on board with this, and our other academic friend who's a little bit more academically minded. But the idea is, with that $50,000 that we're asking for, is that we would basically take this kind of rough idea that we've presented to them, that they seem to be interested in, that they think is a kind of, of course, any consultant is always willing to take your money, but a firm like Tweeg, I'll say, they're booked up enough that if they don't think that there are legs to an idea, they won't really waste their time in working on it, because even though I can give them, $50,000 for this proposal, if they didn't see that it had legs themselves, like $50,000 is not a lot of money to them. And so it's not going, unless this work could lead to more work in the future, this would be a very uninteresting thing to them. So I think I have a little small vote of confidence from them, and based on the work that I've presented to them and the discussions that I've had with them so far, that this idea does have some legs. So I apologize. I kind of skipped ahead of the idea because I'm assuming most people have watched the initial video. I'll drop that on screen for a second, and maybe I should just do a quick run through of the idea, right? Because I think there's probably a good chunk of people who have no idea what I'm talking about right now. So let me see if I can pull this up. I'll send this off screen. So this is just a capture of the initial idea that I sketched out in my last YouTube video where I went through this idea. And just very quickly, in a traditional insurance scheme, you have, let's see, we'll try to highlight stuff. You have a person and a corporation, right? And they're exchanging cash for risk and compensation. But the key thing that I've kind of identified in here is this claims verification process that happens because in normal insurance models that most people are familiar with, it's kind of necessary to ascertain that damage occurred, that there was a cause of damage that was covered by a policy, and that, you know, the amount that can be reimbursed for insurance, right? And most insurance companies spend, you know, anywhere between 25 to 35% of their kind of cost of doing business into like this claim verification process, which is quite high. So I've tried to kind of reimagine insurance that doesn't care whether or not you own something. And so the basic idea is that and insurance at its core is a probabilistic risk monetization scheme, right? I think Croy Mons has just kind of commented in the chat as well. Insurance is risk mitigating and essential for economic growth, right? So people in insurance make money because they build actuarial tables that kind of, you know, like model and predict the risk of a certain person or building experiencing harm or damage, and they base that based on, you know, statistical records of driving for different populations or for weather models or a variety of things. But the idea that I've kind of latched onto is for an initial market is to build a earthquake mitigation service or earthquake risk mitigation, because earthquakes have this very nice property from my perspective that there's an epicenter. They're globally monitorable by a wide variety of governmental and academic bodies who make this data available publicly, and I have a bit more I can show about that this time. And basically, you know, the kids version of the smart contract here is that if there's a disaster greater than some magnitude within some distance of some location, from a start date till an end date, pay out this amount, right? And the idea that I have is that I actually don't want the company or the entity that is producing this kind of IP to actually underwrite or hold any of these contracts. I just want to make a marketplace for people who want to get rid of risk and people who want to seek yields to kind of come together and swap these intangible assets, the risk for the yield, right, for the cash flow. So that's the basic idea, and I've gone through a little bit more in depth. I'll leave this off the table for people who want to watch the other video, because I don't want to repeat the last video here. But the basic idea is that these people, yeah, they bid and whatnot. I might have to go into it, because it might not make sense. But I want to get back to the new developments, which I think are a little bit more exciting. So let's get the other stuff back on screen. So as I was alluding to right above, the reason I've kind of chosen earthquakes for the initial market is this is the usgs.gov site. And, you know, this is their live feed of earthquakes that have happened in the past day above a certain magnitude. And this is not the only entity that does this. There's, I believe, IRIS is another kind of network. And there's the Japanese Meteorological Association, and many countries do this. But the idea is to build an oracle pool from these multiple different sources to arrive at a consensus of what is and isn't an earthquake. And then what I've done here, which I think is kind of fun, is I've kind of built up a data set for the past 120 years of, if you look at the upper right hand side, magnitude of earthquake is done in color, and the radius is also kind of influenced by this. I'll turn this off. So if we start at 1900, it's not that more earthquakes are happening now. If you see 1970 to 2020, there's a on and higher and higher thing, but I basically filtered the data set for magnitude 2.5 earthquakes. Croy, Monza. Let me get to that in a second. But as they deploy more and more sensor networks throughout the world, we detect more and more of these events. So you see, this is just blowing up, and I believe that the time window right now. Let me pause this. This is every earthquake from August 12th, 1993 to August 11th, 1995. So let me make this slightly smaller to try to make it a year-long slice. That's roughly a year, so we'll play this. So this is a 1 year window into all the earthquakes that are happened, and you see very occasionally these big yellow dots. And I'll actually add a filter onto it to make it a little bit more legible. So we can choose magnitudes greater than, not 2.5, because there's might be too much noise there. But let's go for the peak. So here's the peak of the second part of the distribution. This is magnitude of, let's just do 4, and even 4 to 9.5. So here we're looking at earthquakes between a magnitude of 4 and 9.5. And again, the idea that this data set is quite, I don't know, interesting, beautiful, and you can imagine building risk models against all this. As Croy Mons alludes to, Aon is a risk merchant. They insure more or less everything. What I think is different about this is that by putting this kind of risk market onto the blockchain, you're basically making it so much easier to enter into and out of these kind of contracts. So you can imagine taking a insurance contract out for several hours or even like a minute, like if something happens in this moment, which I think would kind of greatly increase the size of the insurance market, because you can imagine like wedding planners or something like that. People who, the same way record labels don't generally deal with individual YouTubers for streaming license agreements because the cost of doing business is so high that they can't afford to talk to an individual YouTuber to license them, the rights to stream their music on their stuff. And we have all these DMZ takedown kind of notices or copyright claims on YouTube videos. I think the same thing kind of exists in the insurance business, where the cost of writing a contract prevents insurance companies from seeking out and selling insurance to many, many markets. And so this idea that I'm talking about is actually something that is kind of happening in the insurance company for the past couple of years. It's called parametric insurance. And it's the idea that there are trigger conditions that cause claims to pay out rather than underlying assets being damaged in claims verification. So, you could write a policy that if winds greater than 150 kilometers are in a certain area for, more than a minute or two, then this policy will pay out. But those insurance companies still are, they still have the manual kind of paperwork and onboarding process of a typical insurance company, whereas a blockchain entity would be able to basically do this as code as law. And there's a joke, right? Insurance is a service where someone sells you something to pay out for something in the future and then never pays out, right? And so I think there's this very appealing aspect to code as law, which makes people can kind of feel secure knowing that for what they paid for, they will get what, if the bad thing happens that they were worried about, they will be covered for the thing, for the amount that they've paid for in the premium, which I think is pretty cool. because I have had several not great encounters with insurance companies when, I was hit by another car or something like that in the States. In other kind of quick, this was supposed to be quick updates. I have pitched this idea to another investor, and that pitch went well enough that I have now a second meeting with an additional business partner in them. So I'm looking for seed funding for this outside of Catalyst as well. And if all goes well, this could be pretty cool. What else is there? There was the Twig thing I mentioned. Twig, let's just pull them up quickly. I apologize for the light mode. I've noticed that I can't run this site in Chrome because it tends to crash. So I had to load up Firefox to handle it. So it's kind of funny. So Twig is, like I said, if we just look at them, fintech, you can see they mention IOHK. Twig were the leaders of the design of Plutus, a smart contract language for one of the world's top 10 cryptocurrencies with IOHK. They're basically a functional software development house, functional programming, Haskell and Nix. And I use my background a little bit. My shell is a little bit messed up, but I also use NixOS. I enjoy learning about functional programming, and I've been doing that for a few years now. I use Python in my day job, and I'm actually right now, for fun, trying to take this data set and trying to use it to predict earthquakes just in a historical kind of modeling without any understanding of the underlying plate tectonics kind of thing. But that's it. I've requested, Croy, thank you. I'm trying to pay attention to the comments. $50,000 on Catalyst. Let me see if I can pull that up. I think it's not in here. But I think I mentioned earlier in the stream, that is basically to pay Twig to develop the initial proof of concept smart contracts in Plutus that would be needed to run this marketplace. So I've outlined 3 contracts in my initial video. One is a kind of insurance contract. 2 is an insurance company contract, which has to do with leverage and the amount of leverage that a insurance entity can take on in this proposal, which protects the insurees from counterparty risk. And the third is a kind of meta contract to manage the entering into and out of insurance contracts for insurees. This proposal doesn't include any funding for front-end development or of the marketplace or the website or anything like that. I believe that if we can kind of prove out the underlying kind of concepts and everything in Plutus and do all that, then I'm confident that I can raise funding and even do it myself to build up the front end website. I wouldn't literally do it myself, but working with a team of my colleagues who I've worked with in the past, who I've gotten interested in this project, we could kind of throw up a front end and build this marketplace, which would be super cool. And my idea is basically like something like Binance, except instead of trading and selling cryptocurrencies, you would basically have like another DeFi marketplace, except instead of giving each other loans, people would be offering or seeking insurance from each other. And initially, like I said, the initial limiting factor on the insurance offerings would be things that we had access to in an Oracle pool to make either up or down bets on something happening. And that's why we kind of focused on earthquakes so much earlier, because of the kind of availability of the data set as a global data set. I've also looked into NASA and some different rainfall data sets, which I think would be really cool to make, is a parametric rainfall insurance offering, where basically, you could imagine a farmer in Sudan, paying like 3 to 5 ADA for rainfall insurance for a couple $100s to protect their crop. And if their area did not receive minimum rainfall that was outlined in the policy, they would receive funds equivalent to their whatever they paid in the premium, which would be what they expected to receive for their crop. And so I think this could really have some legs and be cool. A prospectus website or so. I do not have a prospectus or website up publicly. This is very early. I have a pitch deck that I'm working on that basically I took to my initial investor, and that got me the second meeting. I will be working on that more because I did not address some like key startup fundamentals, like the total addressable market and the different things like how big is this market, how big do we think we can do this, what the cost of customer acquisition and various things are going to be. So I'll be working on that for a little bit before I put that. I don't know if I should put that out publicly, but that's what that is. Yeah. So if you're not familiar, let me pull it up. The information that is available publicly is a previous 30-minute whiteboard YouTube video, as well as I think this is it, the proposal out here. Right. Which, like I said, let me look at the feedback. The feedback that I received was that it lacked depth of implementation. So what it looks like this funding would provide is basically like a single sprint or so. A sprint is like an agile sprint in software development that anyone who's done software development is familiar with. But basically it's this idea that we set out some kind of, we have a sprint planning session, we set some targets for the next 2 weeks usually, and then we try to execute on as much of that as possible. So the Twig team and myself, my other technical co-founder, and probably one or two other friends who we've worked with in the past, if we can get them interested, would basically take this and try to develop that into a kind of minimum viable prototype or series of contracts that we could then raise additional funding with. Yeah, let me throw the link. Oh, let's go. The link. Let's go. I think I'm in my personal YouTube account, so please excuse me. I might have to log in as my channel account. Otherwise, it might prevent me from sharing a link. One sec. I'm trying to switch over to my other account. Okay, I think, yeah, okay, here's the link to the proposal on IdeaScale. And was there another link? There's a link in the YouTube video. It's actually linked on that proposal, so I won't bother to link it again. If you scroll down on IdeaScale, there's a 30-minute proposal here where I go through basically this whiteboard kind of drawing that explains the idea more in depth. And yeah, what we're trying to do. I think one thing I'll just mention, because it wasn't covered so much in that video, is initially the idea is to go for earthquakes, again, for the kind of, because of the data and information that's available on them. But eventually I see this as being basically insurance or event risk contract marketplace for anything that is on the available in an Oracle pool. So the other thing that I kind of mentioned, Croy, thanks. How can we help you? One sec. That's very exciting. I'm excited by your feedback. Eventually, I'd like this to basically be available to any kind of data source or any data stream, and it kind of, in a way, turns the world into a roulette table, right? Like you can basically speculate on anything happening any place in the world, but the way I kind of have started to explain it is that just like Elon Musk had this idea for sexy, right? Or roadster and then sexy, where he started with the roadster, which he took a glider from Lotus, like a shell of a car, and threw some batteries and some DC motors in it, and made it maybe AC motors actually. Turned it into an automobile because that was a low volume, high margin product that he didn't need to make hundreds of thousands of, just a few, a couple hundred or thousand. Then he went to the Model S, which is a top end luxury car, and then he went to the Model E. I'm trying to structure this in a way such that we have clean, available, trustable, independently verifiable data sources as the initial kind of market launch. And that's why earthquakes were so cool, because earthquake waves, travel all the way around the world for the large ones and can be detected by many, many different people. It should be rather indisputable as to when they happen. The larger the earthquake, the more people can detect it. It's pretty cool. I actually learned while I was doing research for this that anti-nuclear proliferation treaty people also piggyback onto the earthquake detection network to basically detect, large explosions through the earthquake detection network of the world. So, Croy, you've actually already helped me quite a bit. This Aeon Risk. Aeon is a risk merchant. You gave me something to Google. To be honest, I didn't know what Aeon or this risk merchant thing was. I am not an insurance person. I am basically coming from the outside of insurance, and I can maybe talk about a little bit about my own career a little bit. I'll just pull up my LinkedIn. Yo, Nostradamus. So this is me. That's my full name. I'm sorry, I just outed myself. And I have a background in liberal arts, and then I went into architecture, like buildings. And while I was in architecture school, I got exposed to Arduinos, which are embedded microcontrollers for noobs. And I basically taught myself programming there, and I got a fellowship here where I got a full scholarship and tuition stipend kind of thing, and health insurance, which is a big deal in the States, to basically do work in a lab and develop some of the ideas that I was doing more. And then I worked in R&D at Guardian Industries, which is a large flat glass manufacturer, where I was basically trying to develop and work on embedding sensors into glass assemblies to put in windows so that you could harvest energy and detect various phenomena in building facades. So if you think of a skyscraper, the kind of the work that I was doing in my graduate work was around, how do you say? I had this idea that, we're calling like smart environment, smart homes, smart buildings, but they're actually pretty dumb because they don't have a lot of input. And it's kind of difficult to teach something to be smart if it doesn't have a lot of input into it. So I was really interested, and I did a lot of work here in trying to put sensors into our built environment. It's not open for correct connection requests. I will try to rectify that. Corey, if you can send me a tweet, a DM or something, I'll try to connect you directly. I then, while I was working at this glass company, I started a collaboration with the chief design officer of this company called Godrej & Boyce, which is basically one of the large conglomerates in India. And while I was there, I was working on their kind of smart home, IoT, innovation and design business, or centralized function to help all of their businesses kind of modernize and do stuff. And while I was there, I also started an initiative to kind of modernize their manufacturing using 6-axis industrial robots and advanced CAD/CAM techniques. While I was there, I did more and more programming, and then basically I moved back to Japan as a robotics engineer and kind of went back and forth because I was working in a very small startup, which eventually went bankrupt. But during the course of that, I started as a robotics engineer. I went into product management, basically trying to right the ship that was very clearly going down. And during the course of that, I kind of got really serious about programming, and I taught myself enough to train and develop AI models to use in like forecasting or like computer vision or other kinds of things like that. And most recently, I changed jobs to another Japanese company, where I do the same thing. So that's my kind of professional CV, and why I think I'm kind of qualified to be in this space. Basically, I work in the kind of fuzzy front end in a lot of large companies. It's called a fuzzy front end because like the questions are kind of vague, the problems are vague. We don't really know what we're trying to do, but as we kind of throw money at these problems, we try to understand more about them. So the $50,000 is it's a lot of money, right? But from my perspective, I believe that, or at least I hope that in Catalyst we start to see more proposals that are kind of being ambitious and trying to solve big problems. And if I fail, of course, whatever work that we've done, I'll open source, I'll give it back to the community, kind of thing. And hopefully someone else can build off of it, or will try to build off of it more in the future. I don't see this as the only. Actually, I'll rephrase it. I don't see this as the only funding I will ask for. It probably will be the only funding I ask for from Catalyst, because I believe that if I do get the funding on Catalyst, it will take us far enough into the development of this that I can then go to more traditional VCs and raise the rest of the capital if the community deems that as what do you call it, as desirable. I think it'd actually be kind of cool to maybe open this to further funding if we get there from the Catalyst pot, and maybe make some kind of native token on the Cardano chain to represent equity, and maybe the whole community can own this entity. So I'm open to kind of ideas like that as well, but that depends on the funding and who we get for the different rounds. So that's that. I think I can get back to some of the other criticisms that I was receiving for this, and we can try to go through it. I think that mostly in the same vein. I'm going to read some of the nicer comments too, even though I said I was bored by them, because my ego took a little bit of a hit. So somebody said that with respect to whether the proposal effectively addresses the challenge, yes, it has big potential for a vast platform if executed correctly. Thank you. An insurance marketplace can drive user adoption. Yes, I agree. And it's so sad. See, this is what I'm saying. This guy or person, gal, woman, rated me a 5, but they left me no feedback. So even though it's great that I got rated a 5 by them, I actually value these 2 comments more than the 5, because I can't do anything with this 5, right? I guess it boosts the score of the proposal if people are looking at that, but I much more appreciate this person, because I think this person is actually helping me develop this project further. We talked about these 2. So this person saying they have a solid proposal and asking for a modest amount to get underway. Rated a 4. Thank you. I also think when if we just take a little bit of a step back, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think $50,000 is a ton of money for trying to test out an early idea and see whether or not it works. I have a lot of friends who went into academia, and it's kind of funny when you work in academia. When I've worked in these R&D centers, you go there and the academics are very kind of like perplexed when you tell them that, like, basically companies don't think a lot longer than 5 years out into the future, and if you can't kind of commercialize something in 5 years, then it doesn't have a lot of space to work inside of a corporation. And so most academics will be like, oh, like 5 years, it's nothing. How can you do that? But, I also think, when I look at my academics friends' lives, how much of their time do they waste, writing grants and submitting proposals for funding. Whereas when I worked in the companies I've worked in the past, I literally had a credit card with a $20,000 limit, which, I could go to my boss and I could say, I need this to do this so that I can test this. If it works, this is what's going to happen. If it doesn't work, this is what, we will have learned. Can I do it? Yes or no? And, 9 times out of 10, they'd say yes. And the times that they didn't, they'd say, I'm not quite clear on this kind of thing. And so I think that what I kind of hope happens more on Catalyst is people do be a bit more ambitious in what they want to do. They're kind of open with the risks and how they might fail and what the kind of the learning will be for the community in the case that they do fail. And we can start to try to bite off a little bit larger chunks. So this proposal shows very interesting examples. The specific development plan is not presented convincingly. So I'm going to lean again on Twig, just as I said earlier in the video. I am, let's say, a beginner Haskell person. I've been studying and playing around with Haskell for a few years now, and I admire the system, and I try to kind of wrap my head around it as much as I can, and I try to evangelize as much as I can with my professionally trained computer scientist friends. But I am more kind of, at least prior to 2 or 3 years ago, most of my work was kind of more in the design and product management side of things. So not project management, product management, right? So I'm used to thinking about what is important, what questions are out there, and how do we kind of find out if they're viable or not quickly. But I am leaning more on Twig to kind of figure out whether or not the system that I've outlined and kind of napkin sketched works within a Plutus framework. I believe it would, and from the conversations that I've had thus far with Twig, I believe they think it will. So that's kind of cool, because as elsewhere they kind of say on their website, Twig are literally the people who wrote Plutus, the smart contract language based on Haskell for IOHK. So I believe that part of the reason I want to do this in Cardano and not in Solidity or Ethereum is I'm a strong believer in functional programming, and I believe that having this kind of like strongly typed language be the basis for these like core fundamentally financial kind of offerings can offer a lot of assurance to people that what they're paying for is actually correct. Because what can't happen is someone's life is upended by a natural disaster, and then they find out that the insurance that they paid for is faulty and doesn't execute the way they thought it would, and we have a kind of MakerDAO or parity wallet kind of situation on our hands. So the next question, let's go down, because I'm happy if you guys who are in the stream, if you ask more questions, I will of course revert to you. If Nostradamus or Patrick are there. Beyond the high-level implementation section, it's not at all clear where the technical documentation, white paper, or other information describing this protocol exists. Also not clear who the developers building the smart contracts will be without GitHub links to properly vet. Yeah, so the developers will be, at least for the initial work, Twig. And the technical, I'm also in talks to basically formalize and draw up kind of using like a serious scientist, a white paper outlining how the system would work and that kind of thing. Besides lacking documentation, the project plan reads more like a concept plan, and the implementation needs to be followed up with a detailed budget or breakdown or project roadmap. I agree. It is a concept plan. and implementation is kind of lacking, to put it nicely. But I'm trying to work on that, and I'm totally prepared to fail and not to receive funding from Catalyst. Probably in that case, what I would do, because I was kind of working under a deadline to get this in for Catalyst, is I'd probably revise my proposal and address some of these criticisms, because during the feedback phase, I didn't get any feedback, which was kind of too bad. And so it's only after I saw the assessments that I started to have some of this, which I would have loved to have had earlier, but it is what it is. And I think I would probably give Catalyst another shot before trying to develop or gather funding off chain, let's say. But I do feel like $50,000 is not a ton of money to be trying to do something like this. Tweeg is being very kind of generous with their time and budget to kind of entertain working on a project of this size. I think, like I said, because they think it is interesting and it could be something like that. So no, Croy, you don't have to preface anything with "don't want to be a pessimist." I want to be I want pessimists in the room, because I want people to attack this, and I want them to how do you say, take it apart so that we can make it better. So I am not at all, I have no problem with pessimists. So I think I addressed this earlier on, but I don't think that we can play, at least initially, in the space of legally mandated insurance contracts. Because, as you noted, and as everyone knows, like, insurance is so different depending on where you are, and there's all kinds of different requirements around it. So it's a little bit fuzzy with the marketing aspect of it, but really this is more of just like a betting line where people can choose to bet on or against certain events happening and then be compensated if they are correct, right? Yes, Patrick. So it's 100% focused on Oracle-based parametric insurances. We're not interested in selling insurance. We're not interested in underwriting insurance. I'm getting a flashback from that Say Anything, I think is the movie. I don't want to buy, sell, but basically we're making a marketplace and providing the smart contracts for other people to offer insurance to each other. That's the basic idea. And yeah, Nostradamus has pointed out, I think as part of this, we will throw in proof of life as a kind of value added service on the platform. He pointed out that, let's say you have taken out $1 million of insurance on an earthquake in Tokyo happening, that how do you ensure that someone has access to that in the event that you die? And so probably we would offer, like the same way that when you buy glasses online, you can pay extra for high refractive glass, thinner lenses and that kind of stuff. I think there would be kind of a base offering and then little, extra features that you could kind of tack on there. And that would be how we address that. So proof of life could come alive. It's funny. I tend to agree with these ZSSR 136 and 111 that the project is lacking in some information. So it was kind of funny to me. What is this? This proposal provides sufficient information to assess. Somebody else says, excellent level of information, 5. Right? So this is I think this idea or this comment I actually have probably the best kind of answer to. The proposal refers to the creation of a development team. The fund is intended to serve as part of the financing. The proposal contains great ideas, the feasibility of which depends on the team to be formed. The information is not sufficient for a feasibility assessment. So as I said, the team at least half of it would be Twig resources. And Twig are the people who wrote Plutus. So if they can't do it, I don't think anyone can. Thank you, Croy. I appreciate you joining, and a lot of good questions. Patrick has asked, if you don't get funding, will you apply again? I think I'll give it another shot on Catalyst, because I felt like the DApp round this time was rather small. So if I bother applying again on Catalyst, I think I will wait for not Fund 5, but probably Fund 6, when it seems like the rounds are doubling each time, and I will probably try to Twig. Twig are a functional programming, I don't know if you'd call them a consultancy or development house, and they are actually it's funny. I always encountered them because I think I use NixOS, and they are always writing these really great blogs on different features that they're actually implementing in Nix, because the PhD who wrote or published the paper that kind of outlines Nix is an employee of Twig now. And so they're a very, how do you say, prestigious or smart think tank of people. And more relevant to what we're talking about, they're the ones who wrote Plutus or designed Plutus for IOHK, right? Were the leaders of the, let me be exact, because I don't want to misrepresent it. Twiggers were leaders of the design of Plutus, the smart contract language for one of the world's top 10 cryptocurrencies with IOHK. So I thought that was funny because I've been using the Twig blog for years now to help me kind of understand and use NixOS and other Haskell kind of related stuff. And I didn't know that they had anything to do with Haskell, or not with Haskell, with IOHK. But they do, and they're actually kind of core to this thing. So I think hopefully that lends some confidence to people that if the proposal does get funding, we would have like some of the preeminent minds in cryptocurrency, Haskell and Plutus related programming space working on this. So budgetary requirements are not addressed in much detail, nor other ideas about how the project plans to execute in the short to medium term and actually developing on Cardano. So yeah, totally, it wasn't included. The talks were early on, and I had asked for permission to outline what the conversation with Twig and other stuff, and I hadn't yet received permission from them. I received permission in the last couple of days to discuss this publicly. So that's why it wasn't included in the proposal, because unfortunately that permission was not granted until after the proposal was, or the submission deadline was over and the editing period was over. So as far as the budget goes, basically it's going to Twig, and I won't be paying myself because they're going to be eating up the budget. This proposal is missing much information a complete DApp should have, including in the proposal, technical docs, detailed project plan, budget, benchmark, and metric to track the project into implementation. Yeah, because I don't think that, I think part of this funding is to basically produce this set of documents, right? And to do this kind of stuff. And I'm happy to put in my time, but to kind of do all this stuff, I do think that it needs a little bit more effort from other parties. And my time is not cheap. I earn over $100,000 a year, and I'm working after work to do this in my free time and on weekends as much as I can. But I do need some funding to kind of take it to the next step or the next level. And so what I'm offering, I believe, is something that I think is exciting to the Cardano community. Something that I think that if we do succeed will be important and contribute to Cardano being part of a new global financial operating system. Because to be clear, insurance is like one of the base underlying services which underwrites the entire global economy. And if you want to have your system be part of a global financial operating system, I do believe that insurance is a key place to start with an offering. So, there's no questions or other questions. I might jump back to the pretty visualization of earthquakes all around the world because I was happy to get this working. Let me just make sure that's all the feedback that was given. So those are the questions that I have access to. This was the OECD stuff on insurance. This is the other earthquake static snapshot. Yeah, and yes, for anyone else watching, Patrick is also doing something in the insurance space, so it could be quite interesting. I've told him I'm very happy and open to collaboration because he's one of my like 2 or 3 viewers of this goddamn channel. And so it would be a lot more convenient if we could just collaborate together and not have to talk over YouTube, Patrick. So how long have I been streaming? Coming up at an hour. I hope this was somewhat helpful to anyone considering to vote or not to vote for this idea. I don't know. I'm pretty excited. I've had various startup ideas in the past. I've never put in as much work as I have on this one to try to actually, get serious about finding funding and investors to realize them, because I haven't really believed in one in as much as I have this one. So it's really cool. I've started talking to my brother, who actually has done a few startups and has now got one that I believe is valued at several $1 million, and gone through several rounds for advice on how to make a good pitch deck and stuff like that. And so it's definitely, I'd say I've had a pretty good career in large corporations doing advanced technical projects, but of course I've always had talented team members around me who filled in and took care of other needs. Like I've never really had to worry about finances too much or different aspects like that. So it is quite kind of fun to have to juggle all these different hats and try to figure things out and, do kind of self-promotion and marketing with investors. But it's quite exciting. I can see it being addicting, and I really appreciate your time, and thanks for watching this video. So I'll let you get back to it. And I was a little bit nervous and thinking, so I didn't even drink any of my beer. Last call. Any questions? I'll go full screen. You can see my sweat. Yeah, Patrick, I agree. Like, part of my plan is that maybe I relocate from an expensive first world country to someplace where the burn rate and my stake pool earnings can kind of how do you say, provide for my family. Right, I can understand why most startups are done by 20 somethings now, because I have a good life. I have access and prestige, and like, why isn't this good enough? Why would I push myself harder, kind of thing. But I've always wanted to make something myself, and I've always wanted to do something that was interesting and I don't know, worthy of recognition in a larger domain. So it's quite fun and interesting to do that. So if this doesn't work, I can see myself trying again, for sure. And The investor that I've talked to so far has also kind of recommended, like, just because we go in this way doesn't mean we'll come out the other way, right? So, like, of course, in any startup, you have to be prepared to pivot and adapt. And so I think that's kind of built into the proposal already, because we have several different customers in mind, from selling reinsurance to insurance entities to, individual to, like business operators. There's a variety of ways we could take this platform. And there's that. Exactly, right. So if ADA continues the price appreciation, I can self finance. So thank you, everyone, and by everyone I mean Patrick and Nostradamus. And have a good night. Cheers.